Let's start with where we are. Just sort of set out what you think the terms of the coming debate and the coming negotiations, if there are to be negotiations, are.
Well, I think obviously there are going to be two sides to it. Let me start with the EU side. And the first thing, I think, just to wrap our heads around, because we're British and it's hard, is they don't really talk about us very much at the moment. We're not a priority. They've got far bigger fish to fry than any improvements on the TCA with us. And so we have to go as demandeurs, and we have to offer them something that they want. Now, there's stuff that they want. I mean, mobility is something that many European states are very, very keen on. But I think I just detect a hint with some Labour people of two assumptions that are wrong. One, they're falling over themselves to improve the TCA, which they're not. And two, they'll be slightly kinder to Labour because they're not Conservatives, which they won't.
Why are they not falling over themselves to improve the TCA? What is it that about it that they feel is not a high priority to change, given that in certain sectors at least it is potentially damaging, ratcheted up through the years for them?
I think three things. Firstly, because the TCA was disproportionately good for them. They had a good surplus with us. We had a services surplus with them. I think secondly, because the European Union has changed fundamentally since we left and become far more inward-looking and far more protectionist in nature. And so they're less interested in being open. And I can't remember the third thing now, but it was really clever, and it'll come back to me now. It'll come back.
It's always the trouble with the third thing.
Yeah, you should never do that. That's a
we will come to the
error.
Third thing after my third question. Do you have a sense, so that sets out the TCA thing. You said, I think you just said, there are things we can offer.
Yeah.
Are they in the trade sphere or are they in other spheres? People talk about military leadership, etc. Are there other spheres that will impact on this discussion?
Yeah, mobility. Youth mobility is something many European countries want to see.
But they've turned that down, haven't they?
No, they haven't turned it down. I think what happened was the European Commission did this communication to member states saying this is what we should think about negotiating with the Brits. I think they did it as a defensive reaction because they were getting concerned that some national capitals were trying to negotiate bilaterals with the UK, and there was a pushback against that. That's why they brought that paper out, I think, to try and stymie those attempts to do things with individual states. I think there is an appetite for it. I don't think, it'd be interesting to see if a Labour government would sign up on the terms they offer, but one of the things they were talking about, for instance, which, I mean, call me self-interested here, I find hard to imagine, is European students again paying domestic fees in universities, and given the state of university finances, I'm not sure that would be an easy thing for us to give.
And which then leads you to the kind of practical politics of it, I suppose, from both sides. And you made it clear from the European side, things have changed within the European Union since we left. Things are also changing almost day by day when it comes to the politics of internal European countries, of individual European countries. You think, how much difference, if France votes as it might vote for a new and hard right in inverted commas government, or seems to be setting the scene for a Marine Le Pen presidency, how much difference does that make to these debates we've just been talking about?
Well, paradoxically and slightly uncomfortably, it might actually make things easier in the sense that European populists, A, are very fond of Britain, B, quite like watching us do Brexit, and C, might quite like to do things that irritate the European Commission. So you could imagine a Geert Wilders prime ministership in the Netherlands, sort of the first thing he'd do is come over and say, do you want a youth mobility scheme? No need to talk to the Commission, because my electorate quite likes me doing things they don't like. Now, whether a Keir Starmer finds it comfortable to sit down with those people and talk in those ways is a wholly different question.
You might find it more comfortable than talking to Donald Trump, I suppose, in some respects. If that's the alternatives he has.
We're talking levels of uncomfortableness here, yeah. But the one thing that will change, and it will change on the 18th of July, I imagine, at Blenheim, when we have the European political community, is the United Kingdom will become a country that wants to be a leading player in Europe, that wants to be friends with its European partners, and that wants to see the European integration project succeed. And that marks a significant break from what we've had to get used to.
But then we're back to mood, aren't we, and vibe, and that kind of sense that you say is wrong, actually, in senior Labour politicians, where they say, in a sense, that's enough, actually. They're going to be nice to us because we're Labour.
I think they will welcome it, and I think there's stuff we can do together, and I think in the security and foreign policy spheres there's all sorts of stuff we can sign up to with them. I think when it comes to the fundamental rules of the single market, that will be far less possible. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. The European Union, as I said, is changing. The European Union is going to have to change. They're going to have some really painful debates about how not to let Ukraine join while giving it the impression that they're very keen on letting it join, is I suspect where that goes. That might involve becoming more flexible and actually allowing the sort of cherry picking they wouldn't let us do. So there is scope for this, but I think the initial reaction from the European Commission to us saying, we'd like a bit of chemicals, we're not so hot on freedom of movement, would be to say, we refer you to Michel Barnier's staircase again.
Yeah, yeah. And it was interesting, chemicals. So in the FT very recently, Rachel Reeves talking specifically about chemicals and saying we'd like to do a deal. I think her phrase was something like, my constituents voted leave, she's constituents in Leeds, my constituents voted leave because they wanted to reduce immigration. They didn't vote leave in order to destroy kind of chemical regulations around Europe. When she said that, what impact do you think potentially, and I take your point, they're not thinking about us much at the moment, but potentially that kind of thinking, does that open doors?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think there is scope for some negotiation in certain specific sectors, bearing in mind two things. One, the European Union doesn't want to even give the appearance of making allowances for us, not least because if you get these populist leaders inside the European Union, they might start saying, actually, we don't want to do that bit anymore. Then it becomes really, really problematic. And the second thing is the eye to the future, isn't it? Is the willingness of the European Union to negotiate is going to hinge partly on how big the majority is, how long it looks like they're staying in government, and what the Tories in opposition are saying. Because there's no point doing some lengthy 5-year negotiation with the United Kingdom if you know for a fact that the Tories are going to come back in 10 and rip everything up.
Do you think, I mean, what you were saying about the right-wing parties potentially being an opportunity in a sense for a new government here, because they quite like Brexit and they like the idea of Britain anyway, and they like us, does that also extend to their dislike of environmental legislation, which could then ease the way for Labour to also slide back a bit on some aspects of that? And we were talking earlier about the whole business of zero-emission vehicles and the mandate, and which companies, including companies here today, have complained about, that actually you get a bit of space given to you to at least slow the pace on those things because of things that are happening in Europe.
Kind of, except what I'd say is most of the populist parties are very protectionist. And going back to the previous session when we were talking about rules of origin and EVs, I mean, I'm quite a glass half empty sort of guy, so this is predictable, but I wasn't so much amazed and pleased that they came to an agreement to defer the deadline to 2027. I was more appalled by the fact that the European Union seemed set on doing this sort of act of self-harm in the name of fostering their own industry. And I think those tendencies, those sort of insular protectionist tendencies, probably get worse if the far right come into power. I mean, it varies by country. But, you know, Marine Le Pen is not a globalist free trader.
No. Another kind of a sort of vibe question, I suppose, but it's a really important one.
We're too old to be using that.
We're too, no, I think I could use it quite convincingly, actually, and you'll have to decide for yourself. If Trump is re-elected, does that then have an impact on us and Europe, in a sense? So there's a sort of, does that give Labour then, a Labour government, a kind of a further opening to be able to say to people here, look, we've got to do X, Y, Z, we've got to have this close relationship because look at the alternatives that are offered to us?
I think so in foreign policy, but let me say several things and not say how many so I don't make that mistake again.
Have you got to number 3 yet?
Yeah.
Number 3 has been properly lost, hasn't it? Anyway.
The state of my memory. Let's not talk about that. I think firstly, we can work together with them on foreign policy.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there'll be openness to that from day one, and David Lammy's made it clear that with or without Trump, he's keen to work more closely with the Europeans. I think secondly, if we were really going to hedge about a Trump presidency, we needed to have started 10 years ago. So a lot of this stuff that we're going to prepare for an American disengagement from NATO is nonsense, because actually the Europeans are so woefully underprepared in terms of the kit they have, the capabilities of their deployment. It is a long-term project. And the third thing, which is crucial, I think, is there is a distinction between the political and the economic. So the European Union will sign a foreign policy deal with us that might involve more symmetry, more contacts. What they will not do, and this goes back to what I was saying before about them becoming more protectionist and autarkic, is give us access to the European Defence Fund, which could be the seeds for a future European defence industry that allows us to build the capabilities we need to be self-reliant. On that, they only allow members of the single market in.
Right.
And so there's a real tension between the EU's position on we're all in this together and the UK is a very close ally, and the EU on the economics of security, which is, sorry, you can't play because you're not in the single market.
Right. So 2 questions. Number 1, you're an academic, so you can use the word autarkic without any kind of sense of anyone. What does it mean? What is autarkic?
Self-reliance. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, if that is the case, what is the kind of best way? So give some advice now, basically, is what I'm saying, to an incoming Labour government. How should they approach Europe? What should they? What are the levers they should try to pull? Who are the people? How do they do it?
I think you have to rebuild trust. And I think the thing to do is to make Blenheim an absolute whiz-bang love fest to kick things off. You've got 40-odd European heads of state and government coming to Oxfordshire and you just love bomb them. Building on that, okay, and you get the photos.
Goodie bags.
Well, no, the whole thing, yeah, party bags, the whole thing. Actually,
okay.
one of the many reasons I was surprised that Sunak called the election early.
A McLaren in every bedroom, as it were.
Imagine.
Yeah.
But I think you start with that, then you sit down and say, we need to talk about security cooperation with you. You need to make gestures, and it might be, for instance, sending a few extra troops to Poland or the Baltic states, but showing that we can deliver on what we're talking about. And on the back of that, over time, say, look, we're obviously working together more closely, but if we really want to build the European capabilities of the future, we have to talk about some of this economic stuff. And I suspect that's the way to open it up. There's no guarantee it will happen, but I just think you need to build the trust and lay the foundations first, because actually the trust has been eroded significantly.
Right. And when you say that to senior Labour people and behind the scenes, look, you know these people and they notice a lot what you say. Do you have a sense that there is a Labour Europe policy that they are not revealing on the Today programme or indeed anywhere else, but actually they have it?
No, because it's in the manifesto. I mean, the stuff firstly, I should say I'm fantastically unconnected, and I've never seen any evidence that anyone listens to what I say, but it's kind of you to say so. But I think what they're going to do is there in the manifesto, and I think someone mentioned it in one of the earlier sessions. They're not going to commit to something that is going to drain political energy for a 4 or 5 year negotiation. And as I think might have been Chris who said earlier, the stuff they're talking about is trivial economically. Yeah. They're not looking to the European Union to do the growth that they're making a priority. They're looking elsewhere for that. What they're looking for the European Union for is a reset of our diplomacy, a reset of what they see as the damage done to our standing in the world, and just a closer political relationship with these people. A veterinary agreement's fine. If you import or export food, it'll make your life easier. If you're worried about the NIGB border, it'll make that easier, but it won't shift the dial on growth.
Final thought about the disconnect that there is between, there are all sorts of disconnects between the European Union and us, but when you look at, and this is something Rachel had in one of her graphs, but I just think it's fascinating because it's not necessarily static, it's young people. So here we have this huge, I can't remember what the stats are, but the proportion of young people intending to vote Conservative is really, really tiny this time, really
vanishing,
and slightly better for reform, but only slightly. Whereas you go to France or to Italy or to wherever, what are the drivers of that, and are there drivers that we can see in that could easily come here?
I mean, it's different in different countries. Yeah. So if you take the Dutch, one of the fascinating things about Wilders is his anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim sentiment is grounded in a defense of progressive liberal values. That is to say, these people don't like gay rights. And that's not a position Nigel Farage is going to find it easy to adopt, okay? Because Nigel Farage's form of right-wingism is culturally right-wing as well. So it's different there. The other thing that I think is really interesting in some European countries, and if you take the Dutch, if you take the French, and the AFD to an extent, the AFD are a bit of a mess, so let's leave them out, is these parties make an offer to young people on the economy. So they're saying things like, if we come into power, we have to address as a priority the problems young people face in getting on the housing ladder. Now, that's partly an immigration message, it's partly an economic message. And as yet, Reform have a very, very different sort of economic message, which isn't sort of designed to appeal to young people. One of the things to watch, because from memory, UKIP started out as a very right-wing economically party that was talking about privatising the NHS and stuff like that. And after a few years, it became clear that there was only a limited market for that sort of stuff. So their economic programme drifted leftwards. And I wouldn't be at all surprised in this Parliament to see Reform UK do the same thing.
Anand Menon, it's been a huge pleasure talking to you. We will come to point 3 next year. A round of applause, please, for Anand. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.